of talking about the check-in statement. We hear about it all the time, right? So I'm going to try not to do too much covering ground we've covered before. I'm going to try to make this a little bit interesting by pulling together some pieces that I think are useful in terms of preparing the check-in statement. What I'd like to do, and I find that I feel like I'm a really old guy now because I'm relative to student ministry, because I feel like I've done so many of these check-in statements that I sort of have this depth of experience that just it kind of oozes and wants to come out of me regardless of whether people are interested. With that said, I think I've developed a couple of insights about the check-in statement that I want to kind of get you excited about, because I think a lot of times the check-in statement can feel very much like this is something we have to do. And I need to show up, I need to give my supervision group facilitator my contact sheet so they can check it off and make sure I'm doing what I'm doing. And I've got my check-in statement that I hold in my hand, and then I say stuff that's not even on my check-in statement. And what I want to do is I want to get you excited about that check-in statement is critical, it's important, it's useful, it's beneficial, and it sort of is the, if you think about it, it's sort of the tangible culmination of what student ministry really is. Student ministry is a system. And if you think back to my presentation about family systems, we talked about how one part influences another part, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You change one piece, it changes something else, it changes something else. Student ministry is a system as well. This really clicked for me when I went through the leadership training that Steve's about to do. After a week of being inundated with the student ministry system, you come out of there really understanding and appreciating how well developed a system this is. And so when I think about the check-in statement, what I think about is sort of the foundations of what's the purpose of student ministry, what's the purpose of our supervision groups, what's the purpose of the check-in statement. And as soon as I kind of show you what this scribbling is on the board, which I think would look better if the pens were darker, but I'll kind of outline what it is. This kind of represents what the student ministry system is. And so kind of undergirding the foundation of everything is confidentiality and trust, right? So we talk all the time about how confidentiality and trust is key to our caring relationships, but they're key to the supervision groups as well, right? We have to trust each other. We have to have that trust. We have to maintain that confidentiality for our care receivers and with our conversations within our supervision groups. That's the foundation. At the center is the caring relationship. And then around the caring relationship is our supervision groups play a role, our check-in statement plays a role. We're going to talk through in a couple minutes pieces from the in-depth that can be used in preparing your check-in statement. Okay, the check-in statement is not just this one kind of way of talking about our relationships. It sort of lives down this path, and then once every few months, 2 years, whatever it is you're comfortable with, you go down this other path, and it's an in-depth. The two actually live together, and the two should be connected. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then process versus results. Remember how much time we spent in training talking about process versus results. There's a big piece right in the middle of the check-in statement that talks about process, right? And then there's another piece of the check-in statement that talks about our student minister training in terms of the tools and the skills that we come out of the training with. Those things all come together in this little check-in statement. The humble check-in statement that we have sort of
this love-hate relationship with how do I do this so briefly? How can I present everything that's going on in 1 or 2 sentences, in 1 or 2 minutes? It all comes together. And so that's kind of what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about today. Just a reminder of what's the purpose of the supervision group. And so to talk about this first part, I pulled this straight out of the Stephen Minister Training Manual. Anybody remember those things? We have 2 of them, right? There's a blue one, and then there's sort of a red-ish colored one, depending on when you went through training. So just to remind us of what the training manual says, what the Stephen Ministry system says, is that supervision groups, again, straight out of the manual, serve as a carefully structured process in which Stephen ministers discuss certain aspects of their caring relationships to help one another provide the best care possible. Certain aspects, okay? Not every aspect, certain aspects. Next point that the training manual makes, supervision group discussion about the check-in statement in our groups is structured by using a specific process and tools to enable group members to offer high-quality support, guidance, and accountability. Support, guidance, and accountability. We talk a lot about the support aspect of our supervision groups. We don't spend much time talking about the guidance aspect or the accountability aspect. And those are things I want you I want us all to think about more as we're preparing our check-in statements, okay? And I'm gonna say a little bit more about that in a minute. So there's not out of the training manual, but kind of out of my brain, which is an unusual place to live at times. Here's some questions I want you to consider to help guide you as you're preparing your check-in statement. And I will tell you, I've got a real bias that I think we should be spending at minimum 20 minutes preparing a check-in statement. Okay? There's an old adage, I think I used this in our group a couple weeks ago. I'll probably butcher it, but it's something like a lot of preachers will tell you that if you want them to talk for an hour, give them 30 minutes to prepare. If you want them to talk for 20 minutes, give them 3 days. Takes a lot more time to prepare for a very succinct message than it does for a very long message, okay? Our check-in statements need to be very succinct. So I want everybody, if I had my way, I would see you all taking 20, 25, 30 minutes preparing for every check-in statement. And I will tell you, I do that. I spent 45 minutes preparing my check-in statement this last week for our group meeting tonight. So here's a couple questions, and as we go through the entirety of the presentation tonight, there'll be a couple other questions to consider. So when you're preparing your check-in statement, what comments on your check-in statement are inviting support from your group? Are there any? Okay, so that's just a question to ask yourself. What comments in my check-in statement indicate where I may need guidance? And that's something not to think about just as the words are coming out of your mouth, but as you're preparing it, think about, is there anything I'm putting down here that is telling my group or communicating to my group that I need some guidance? Okay? What comments in my check-in statement indicate I am receptive and willing to be accountable? That's an important aspect of the process. And as I said, I think it's something that we don't really spend too much time talking about in our supervision groups, that notion of accountability. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. It's a different discussion. So that's the purpose of the supervision group. Now let's talk about the purpose of the check-in statement. Again, straight from the training manual. Purpose is to be a structured guide or tool to allow the caregiver to provide a concise update on the caring relationship. On the caring relationship, not the care receiver. Okay? It's the relationship, Stephen. Okay? Only a couple of you smiled at that. Again, straight out of the training manual, Stephen ministers write out 1 to 2 sentence responses to the 6 items in the check-in statement. Again, from the training manual. Preparing these responses in advance keeps the check-in brief and focused. And then finally, preparing in advance helps preserve confidentiality, since having a short, carefully prepared statement reduces the risk of sharing confidential information. All right? So that's just some background to the statement. Let's take a look at the check-in statement form. Look at what's right at the top of the form. Write 1 or 2 sentence answers. Okay? I sometimes see people come in with the check-in statement, and it's long, tiny writing. 1 or 2 sentences. There's no law school adage that if you can't make your point in 75 words or less, you don't know what your argument is. Okay? We should be thinking kind of the same thing with check-in statement. So we now go through each of the 6 questions. Describe your care receiver's primary need or problem. Remember, the training manual said certain of the problems, not all of the needs and problems. Okay? That's part of the preparation that you have to kind of work through as you're preparing this. What really are the issues, the key issues that my group needs to understand to help provide guidance for me, or to help me be accountable about where the relationship is headed. And then a question to ask ourselves is, do I understand my care receiver well enough to be able to sort through all the talk? And most of our care receivers are pretty talkative, pretty loquacious, right? Do I understand what's going on? Am I listening well enough? Am I present well enough to understand, to be able to sort through all that and identify what the key or core issues are, and ask ourselves as we're preparing this, would my care receiver agree with that? I think, most of the time the answer to that would be yes, but it's a good discipline. It's a good exercise. Ask ourselves that. All right? Second question. What does your care receiver need from the caring relationship? This should, remember I talked about earlier, the in-depth? Your focus questions can be really helpful in guiding this. Okay? This question really should address the issue. It should reflect on the nature and the direction of the caring relationship. We've got whole sections in the focus questions that are the spiritual nature of the caring relationship, the direction of the caring relationship. If I want to have another source to help guide me through preparing my comments in the check-in statement, here it is. Oh, but Hawes, that's the in-depth. Well, yeah, but those questions aren't used only when you go down this in-depth path. They're useful when you go down the check-in statement path as well. All right? Then this may include, the answers in this section may include comments about the process. Okay, even though you've got process-related goals, there can be comments about the caring process as well as some results targets. So, for instance, what does your care receiver need from the caring relationship? Care receiver needs to grieve multiple losses. That's a process, right? Care receiver needs sounding board for planning and discussing or decisions to be made about family relationships. That's process, right? Care receiver needs to be able to forgive himself. That's a process.
remember, we learned about process versus results. I see this second section question and the third question as both being very much process oriented. There can also be some results that show up in that my care receiver may need support, which is process, while seeking a new job. That's results. That's a caregiver or care receiver given result. Okay, so those are the kinds of very succinct and specific comments we want to make about what the care receiver needs. What are our process-oriented goals? Again, straight from training manual. Process goals are actions I can do now as the caregiver that concentrate on the other's needs, the care receiver's needs, and leave the results to God. Everybody remember learning about that? Straight out of the training manual. The training manual reminds us that a process approach to caring involves these 5 points, okay? Presence, being with the care receiver. Presence is a process. Service, helping the care receiver without expecting anything in return. Skills, and we talked about tools and skills up here. Using the best caregiving practices. Boundaries, maintaining our boundaries. Again, that gets to confidentiality and trust. And trust, of course, gets to trust. So that's what the training manual talks about as what's involved in the process of caring. And what should our process goals be looking like, and how should they be showing up? So some examples of that are establishing trust, which is critical at the start of the relationship. Active listening is a process. Being present in my care receiver's anger and grieving. Providing support and encouragement. Those are all process-oriented goals. A few years ago, I distilled from the training manual a number of process-oriented goals. A couple of these I struggle with, but for the most part, this is a pretty good list. And I'd be happy to send anybody to this cheat sheet if you'd like. These are all great processes that we can be incorporating into our caring relationships. And if you need a little bit of a hint or a nudge as you're kind of thinking about this can be a real useful reference tool. I'm not so sure about 18.
Can you call that? I can't read them from here.
Sure. Care, listen, accept, understand, encourage, act with humility, apologize for institutional slights or wrongdoing. That one I kind of struggle with too. Straight out of the manual, man. Respect, act with kindness, act with gentleness, act with patience, be considerate, act with sympathy, act with empathy, act graciously, act with compassion, pray for and with, and the 18th one is admonish. That one I kind of struggle with as well. But I'm happy to send that to anybody who'd like that. All right, so those are all process-oriented goals. And one of the things that I just want to kind of underscore as we're going through the preparation of the check-in statement, this is a time to reflect. This is a time for us to be quiet, for us to be still, for us to process internally what's going on in the relationship. To be honest with ourselves, to be humble, to be with humility, to be prayerfully considering what's going on. And this is what I want to encourage us to do as we're preparing these statements. We talk a lot about, before we meet with our care receivers, we prayerfully go into that meeting. When we come out of the meeting with our care receivers, we prayerfully come out and consider. I want us to do the same when we're preparing our check-in statement. And I know asking that is
another thing that we're asking you to do. And finding another 20 or 30 minutes to set aside to prepare the check-in statement maybe is another thing on a very long list of things to do. I do think it's part of our ministry and part of our service. Okay, so what is going well in the caring relationship and what is not going well? And as I was preparing for this presentation and I was going back through the training manual, what hit me very clearly was that in our reporting, we need to be using I statements. To answer this question, it's not just stuff that's happening, events that's happening. I statements should be showing up. I'm comfortable with this. I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm pleased with this. I'm happy with this. I'm sad. I'm dismayed. If we're inviting support from the group, how can we invite support if we're not saying how I am doing? And I think part of the purpose of the supervision groups, and part of that accountability and part of that support is by being open, by being vulnerable, and the way we do that is by saying, here's how I am doing. Not just, well, this happened and that's making this challenging. Well, this complication has shown up. All this external stuff, which goes on all the time, right? Happens in all of our relationships. Happy's last care receiver, just one curveball after another, right? All that stuff was going on. What's not going well? Well, here's the curveball of the week, you know? That stuff does happen. How am I doing with that? All right? So, what's going well? How is the process going? I feel comfortable. I feel happy. I feel pleased. I feel excited. What's not going well? What about the process isn't working well? And I feel uncomfortable. I'm confused. I'm concerned. I'm deeply concerned. I'm discouraged. Those are the statements that invite that kind of support from the group. All right, and then how can your supervision group help you be a better caregiver in this caring relationship? If that in that fourth question we're using those I statements, the answer to number 5 rolls right out of that, right? If I'm confused, if I'm concerned, then that's going to set up what the answer to this question is. So this section is an opportunity, and this question may be the one that we need to spend the most time on when we're preparing. How can our supervision group support us? How can it support me? This may be the part that really takes the longest and takes the most reflection. So for this answer, we need self-reflection, we need self-assessment. Optimizing the purpose of this section requires vulnerability. All right? For us to say, here's what I need from you so that I can do a better job. That requires a little bit of vulnerability. Some questions to consider for this section. What obstacles to being fully present does the Stephen minister need to overcome? Maybe it's something where your care receiver is only able to meet with you at a certain time of day, and you have to rush from work or from picking up grandkids at school or kids at school and dropping them off someplace, and we got Nashville traffic, and you know, I can't ever get there and not be frenzied. Okay, that's a real issue. What's keeping you from being fully present? I find I'm not fully present for my care receiver because what my care receiver is sharing reminds me of this thing that happened. There are a lot of things that can interfere with us being fully present. All right? What caring skills could be improved? See how this all kind of comes together and works together in this beautiful little check-in statement? Where do I need greater clarity? here's what I'm not understanding about what my care receiver is telling me. Here's where this isn't clicking for me. Help me understand this better. Those are examples of some questions that can help us prepare. All right, that's it. That's all I got.
Well done.
Any questions? Yes, Courtney.
I've been doing this a whole year,
Yep.
so, I'm a pro. I've honestly really heard things about accountability in depths, not with the check-in statement, so I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm not sure what that means to talk about accountability in the check-in statement.
Okay. Thoughts on that, anybody? Oh, you wanna hear me more, huh? Cheryl?
No, I didn't, go ahead.
She'll correct you after.
It's a really good question.
Good question.
I think there are a number of places in the check-in statement where accountability it very naturally fits. Frank, I think pick a question. Take a look at, let's say, what's going well, what's not going well. If the check-in statement week after week after week is saying exactly the same thing, then I think there's an opportunity to say, tell us a little bit more about what that means. Tell us a little bit more about how you're doing with that. Because accountability is not just showing up on time, it's not just making sure that we have the regular meetings. Accountability is also asking questions about how really are you showing up, how really are we present, how well do you really understand what's going on?
How well are you listening?
How well are you listening, exactly.
How well are you processing what they're really saying? Because sometimes they say it, and they're not really saying it. Does that make sense? And so how well are you being able to figure out really what they're saying? That's the accountability that I always get to, is that what is she saying, but she's really not saying? What am I really hearing? And that's a huge accountability in my visits, so.
Yeah,
I think there's some accountability too, depending on the care receiver, to seek out other resources. It's not just my care, but maybe they need care from others, or they need care from, resources for career transitions or things like that.
Yeah, I think we can hold each other accountable for managing the process, and how well the caregiver is inquiring with the care receiver in such a way that it's leading the conversation down a path. I mean, there's a lot of different ways I think that shows up. Maybe not necessarily always with the prelude of specifically accountability, but I think some of those questions that are helping to conceptualize where the direction of the relationship, I think those are questions for accountability. Skip.
Another example is, are you keeping your boundaries?
Yeah, boundaries is a big one. Jane.
So the last thing on the screen was about clarity.
Yeah.
And so I would ask, I can't remember how it was worded exactly, but how do you answer that question without and maintain confidentiality?
So in other words,
Well, read how it was again, I guess.
where do I need greater clarity?
Yes, so how do you, is the person filling out the statement making that comment, or are those in the room asking that question?
The way, when I read that, my brain thought about a recent exchange that I had where I realized clarity. I realized that my care receiver, even though she had been telling me that she was raised in the church and she knew scripture and she was well versed, it was really the first time that we had really talked about scripture, and I realized she's very young in her knowledge, and for me it was clarity. Oh, this is where we are, and this is where she is. And so for me it was, it was using questions with her to find out really where she was in that particular piece where we were talking that day. I don't know, that was me with clarity. That's what I had on that one.
Think about question 4, what's not going well? I'm finding myself confused about what my care receiver is telling me about this and this. And I feel like I need to get more clarity about that. And your group can help you think through, well, what are some of the questions that you can ask? What are some of the ways you can go about getting that clarity?
Okay, that was better said.
It's just different.
Much more clarity.
That's right.
Also, clarity about goals. Are we still on our goals, or are we going
Right.
somewhere else?
Right.
Are the goals the same?
Right. Yeah, and I think pretty much anytime the group suggests that it might be a good time to do a relationship inventory, that's a reminder of a way you can get greater clarity. Al?
Back to your list of process-oriented goals that you distilled from the training manual, was admonish really a word that was used?
I think we can eliminate that.
I think I would soften that with maybe
Yeah.
challenge
Oh, what's that?
instead of
I
admonish.
just did the reporting on that one.
Well,
I can take it on this.
which one? No, I'm just thinking, what's the ministry of St. Louis thinking if they're saying you should routinely admonish your care receiver?
I don't know if they said routinely, I think they suggested it's. The only reason I leave it on there is because I haven't figured out why it's on there.
Well,
I haven't figured out what it means, and so it's just kind of a reminder to me to try to figure out what exactly were they thinking with this.
I have a suggestion. Just thinking back to a former care receiver who I did not admonish at all, but I probably had an obligation maybe when she came to a meeting drunk. And she was getting in her car after to go somewhere. I mean, looking back, I probably should have said, are you sure? Or do you really want to be driving? Because but just, like, that might be a circumstance.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and to that point, and kind of as a follow-up to my answer to you, Hal, is there are words that we think have a negative connotation that don't always have a negative connotation. So the word confront can be, a lot of people hear confront and they think, oh, confrontation. But to confront, from a therapeutic perspective, confronting means to present, to look at, and to kind of challenge, to really investigate. And in and of itself, that's not negative. So, what's the definition of admonish? And if we just look at the definition, I knew somebody would, is it negative? Skip.
I used to hate reviews, job reviews, how well you're doing, evaluations, until I realized it's really a gift. I want to be admonished if I'm off target. I want the truth, because the truth sets me free. And so I think admonishment is a positive thing. It also depends on how a person presents it. If it's presented as an attack, that's one thing. If it's presented as to help see a truth. Like to confront is to see a truth as well.
John, Judy has the definition.
I just looked it up and it says, to reprimand, rebuke, scold, reprove, upbraid. None of those are.
Or a feather.
Pretty bad.
John, what
Burn
did
at
it
the
say?
stake.
It was side number 18, it said admonish, or 3 words, I think, I took a picture, but I can't read it. Warn, I think, was the first one after it, and there are 2 other words. Warn, yeah, W-A-R-N, but on his number 18.
Yeah, let me open that up again.
I can see being admonished for not being on time for meetings when you're supposed to, or standing you up for meetings.
Yeah.
There's a point that needs to be an admonishment. If we're gonna have this
Yeah.
relationship, we need.
Confrontation, confront.
Yeah. Or a conversation.
I'm having to find that document again.
Yeah, I took a picture, but I just can't.
Let me give an example.
Sure.
Years ago, I was doing a training event for 500 youth leaders down in Alabama. And during break, we had a restroom break, came back, and I walked up to 5 guys who were my friends from Tennessee. And all of a sudden, one at a time started leaving. And the last guy standing there said, "Skip, you need to know you got a big booger coming out of your nose." I was never so happy for someone to tell me that. Can you imagine me standing in front of 500 people with a booger out the nose?
That's not good.
I mean, that's an absurd example, but yet I was so glad to get that.
Between that and an open fly, that's
It's not admonishment, that's just a fact.
And warn, caution, confront.
Okay.
John,
Al.
I think it gets back to, again, really taking the time to knowing what really you're admonishing, but the better you know your care receiver, you can admonish in a way without them realizing you're admonishing them. You learn that in sales, how you can, you know, attack the customer without them even knowing it.
Right. Yeah, and it's all built on the foundation of the relationship and the extent to which love is present in that relationship. Does scripture have any examples for us of when Jesus admonished people in a very loving and productive and healthy way?
And sometimes not.
And sometimes not, a little more firm and.
Do you ask no sin, cast the first stone?
Yes, I was just thinking that.
I've not come to my time, to his mother about the wine,
Yeah.
come into my time.
Get behind me, Satan.
That was probably pretty firm.
Was there another one on that list that you mentioned that you struggle with?
Yes.
You said, yeah, it was, like in the first 5 or,
5 or 6,
yeah.
Apologize for institutional slights or wrongdoing.
Yeah. That's
What
wrong.
exactly does that mean? What's an example of that?
I'm sorry you were oppressed by the man.
Or hurt by the church.
Yeah, there
And
was.
that, yeah,
The
that,
church is-
now we have had care receivers that experience that.
Yeah, lots.
Yeah, that's a true statement. We probably have had a good number of care receivers who've been hurt by the church.
I don't think that that's a wrong.
Apologize.
Apologize.
I've never gotten fully comfortable with it.
Well, you can say, I'm sorry that happened.
I'm sorry it happened,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not
Not
Yeah.
accepting responsibility.
I'm sorry, he does it.
I don't take responsibility if that wasn't an action that I took, but I can,
Yeah, that's saying
You can
sorry that
empathize.
happened.
You don't have to do a full mea culpa.
That's a very thin line to walk.
You can be sorry that you feel that way.
Sure. Or that it happened,
Just
yeah.
acknowledge it.
Yes. Well, I think the check-in statement, it scares me to death,
The
because
check-in statement does?
Because I'm so afraid I'm gonna breach confidentiality. That's something that I have a problem with anyway, and so I've gotten where my check-in statement is just, and I'm done. And I'm gonna have to work on some of these things, cause I don't see how your group can help you if you don't tell them some of the details of what are going on in your relationship. And that, to me, breaches confidentiality.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the deciding points is, it doesn't take a lot of sort of unique bits of information to start piecing together somebody's identity.
Right.
And so we do need to be very cautious about it. I mean, do we ever need to include, for instance, that a person's a member of Brentwood United?
Never.
Probably not.
No, but sometimes if you're telling much about them, that slips out. It can slip out.
That's the point of having the statement prepared, not sticking with it.
To me, the confidentiality and trust is the cornerstone of this whole organization, and,
Absolutely.
that's why I'm scared of what I'm gonna say to my group.
But within your group, they know that this information is confidential. I mean, you know, so it shouldn't go from there.
Yeah, if
Because
there's a
I do
slip, it
agree.
shouldn't leave that room.
Right.
That's
That is-
certainly the case.
That is a cornerstone of what we do.
We want
the
to
fact that it's
develop the
confidential.
discipline, though, of being able to distill the information down.
Right.
To, give enough information for our group to understand the caring relationship without having to really fully understand who that care receiver is. And that's the distinction.
Well, the more you write it down specifically, read it, take your time on it, read it word for word, the less likely you are to go off in a soliloquy and let little gems lean out. And so, yeah, when you have one where you know you're on a thin line, because it is somebody who is a member of the church, who is a member of some of the Sunday school groups here, who would be familiar because they're in the paper or what have you, those are the times I would be afraid too, and I would literally write every single word down, and I would not say one article, preposition, other than what's on that sheet, for fear of letting something slip.
Skip.
I know you mentioned it, but again, how long should a check-in statement last?
I'm sort of militaristic about it. I say 2 minutes.
I agree.
I think Carol says 2 to 3.
I say 2 to 3.
You can stretch it out to 180 seconds.
You don't really need to say much more than that. You really don't. And if you are, you have to think about why.
Well, and it doesn't include the time that we all talk about it, correct?
No, I think that's where we run into trouble.
I do too.
Well, when we start asking questions, and you have to, before you ask a question of the person that is doing their check-in, you need to have your filter on and say, why, do I need to ask this question? Why am I asking this question?
Yeah, and I think that's the responsibility of the group.
Right.
The accountability of the group is, don't ask a question that doesn't need to be asked.
That's right.
Yeah, think carefully about why am I asking this question? What is the answer to this question going to contribute to
The caring
the
relationship.
quality of the caring relationship?
Because most of the questions come from our own insatiable curiosity.
Yep.
Insatiable curiosity.
Yeah, and I think when we are participating as the non-reporting group member, we have to approach that with an extreme level of humility. We have to, again, going back to foundation of trust, we have to trust
that our fellow Stephen ministers, by virtue of being in this relationship, they understand that relationship better than any of us. And so it's very, very unlikely that any of us is gonna say something that's going to make the reporting Stephen minister go, that's it. I'm gonna go, I'm gonna tell them that. It's all done. That's not gonna happen, right? But I think a lot of times we think, oh, I've got this great insight. Well, maybe you do, maybe not. That's where that humility comes into play. And we have to really be accountable to each other to not ask those questions that really don't need to be asked.
We should just admonish each other, not.
And we should admonish ourselves that we're past 7:30, we need to break. Great discussion, guys.